Hei timatanga, tēnā no tātou katoa. Ki o kuhuanga no roto hauraki, tēnā koutou puta mai tēnei rangi ki te whakarongo ki nei kōrero oku. Ko tata tātou ki te wā o te kaupapa mo te tiriti o Waitangi, tāria te wā ngā kōrero mo te tiriti hei tērā wiki. Engari tēnei au te mihi atu ki a koutou. Ngā uri, tērā matua rongonui i a hau i te tamariki a shū tuku kino i rā kaumātua wa paupau ki te matemate. Nā reira rātou ki a rātou, tātou ki a tātou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Look, thank you very much for turning out today. There is always going to be whitewater, controversy, different opinions about the place that the minerals industry should occupy in New Zealand. Today, however, reflects the fact that the party I belong to, New Zealand First, the government that we're a part of, has no hesitation in pushing the narrative and the agenda that the minerals sector can occupy a far more prominent position in the narrative of our nation. So it's against that backdrop, and it's against the election campaign, where I in particular campaign for a far more robust set of responses from the state, from the bureaucracy, from the government, and indeed from the private sector to create work, income, and better outcomes. So on your behalf, let me thank our hosts for the event. Your operation, not unlike what I saw in Macrae, is impressive. Scott, tēnā koe. Local dignitaries, tēnā koutou. Community stakeholders and all of you who have gathered here today, thank you for turning out. And as our host has pointed out, this is why we're here today, to launch the critical minerals list and the mineral strategy for New Zealand. It is not an innocuous thing to do. It reflects a change in both the economic and political tide. But quite frankly, folks, our presence fulfills a deeper purpose. It's a validation of an industry that has suffered from excessive regulation and poisonous politics. It's a chance to stand with a skilled workforce that is literally worth its weight in gold. I stood last year down into Taipotini, the west coast. Packed hall in Blackball, the historic home of the Labour Party. Amongst people who depend hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year for the minerals resource in terms of their livelihood. I presented to them a vision for the future, utilising our mineral resources, increasing our domestic resilience so we don't need to rely on imported minerals. I was up front. This will mean we will be using our indigenous fossil fuels. We already use them. We rely upon the gas in Taranaki to keep our lights on. We profit from the sale of coal that makes some of the finest steel in the world. And for those of you worried about the last winter, the next winter we will be importing Indonesian coal to keep our lights on. It is a fallacy, it is hypocrisy to say that New Zealand, at our point in the cycle of our modern industrial civilization, do not rely on fossil fuels. We have them, we will use them, and there will be appropriate guardrails to ensure that as the transition takes place, we do not bankrupt communities. We do not destroy the employment prospects of the generations coming through. I spoke also last year of cutting barriers to development, but not corners, and enabling us to play a more vigorous role in terms of where our nation sits in respect of supply chains. It's not widely known, but some barriers They're not imposed by government. They come in the form of corporate straitjackets. And one should look no further than the directors and executives of our banking sector. They are enthralled to climate groupthink. They're the new gatekeepers. They are imposing upon our farming and our mining community a host of new moral priorities under the cover that they alone are going to tell us how to save the planet. Meanwhile, our regional communities are buckling under the effect of their luxury beliefs. Our enterprises in the mining sector are operating legitimate enterprises. They do not deserve to be served up letters, threats, bullying tactics by these corporate undertakers. And I'm not going to stand for one more minute of that woke-riddled intimidation from these people who think that they have a greater authority than the politicians of this country to drive certain businesses out of existence that they've taken a dislike to. A type of malevolence that you and I as Kiwis cannot afford to stand back from. If we want economic growth in New Zealand, we have got to have a profound discussion as to what percentage of the green tape, what percentage of the climate regulation can we actually afford. If it's good enough for New Zealand to be beset by a debate about the Treaty of Waihi, then it's about time we had a similar debate as to where the pendulum should sit between green ideology and the need to grow our economy and keep our people in New Zealand for fear of turning into net exporters of our human capital to the rest of the world. To this end, our party will be promoting a private members' bill to ensure that these privileged corporate leaders do not inflict, without cost to the enterprises that they occupy and represent, costs. We cannot afford to have this level of dead weight imposition upon our regional economies and our mineral sector. It's not only unfair, it's unmandated, and it is going in a form that represents an unchallenged trajectory. Time has come, folks, for us to stand up and say, in respect of that wokeism, enough is enough. In that respect, I must acknowledge my ACT colleague, Mark Cameron, who single-handedly, on behalf of our parliamentary community, has stood up on behalf of your second and third cousins, the farmers, who are being bullied, who are being marginalised by the banks as they demand that farmers account more and more as to what is the conduct, what is the effect of each cow as it generates milk upon the planet. These banks have no authority to monster our most lucrative export sector in that vein. Thank you very much, Mark Cameron from the ACT Party. I have also spoken to the CEO. I've been contacted by the CEO of the Kiwi Bank. And I don't want to say too much more about this, but I want to point out to you, if we want economic growth and we want minerals to create jobs, as they do here, potentially another 300 jobs in this particular location, up to thousands more jobs throughout New Zealand, then we need to identify who, where, and when are the forces impeding this growth going to appear, and who gave them the authority to thwart our ambitions. We've done a lot over the last 12 months to try and change the tone and the range of opportunities in this sector. We've introduced the Crown Minerals Amendment Bill, That overcomes the ban on petroleum exploration beyond Taranaki. Do not underestimate the number of firms who have already been in contact with me who both want to stay in New Zealand now and also re-engage with New Zealand. We've also made it easier for low-impact miners to engage with the bureaucracy and secure their permits. We've made changes to the RMA so that coal mining consenting is no different for water purposes to other types of resource consenting. Sadly, the last government, under the cover of bureaucratic camouflage, sought to close down coal mining by changing the RMA while no one was looking. That has gone. The civil service in MBI, and I must acknowledge the CEO, Carolyn Tremaine, today from MB, they have well and truly stepped up to the plate, got rid of the backlog, and have a far more efficient system, to the point that 74% is the number, reflecting the increase in minerals permitting output. We've also begun the journey to re-establish credibility in the minds of international investors. My colleague David Seymour will have more to say about the new criteria pertaining to foreign direct investment. And for those people who struggle to adapt and change in respect of the mineral sector, if it's good enough for New Zealand first to take a very adaptive approach towards foreign direct investment, to rehabilitate our economy, to drive the renaissance of our community prospects in relation to jobs, the capacity to restore the environment, the ability to boost our security. If a party as nationalist as the one that I belong to, led by my leader, then that shows it's about time every other Kiwi went through a process of adaptation as well. We've also created an encyclopedia of technical information, otherwise known as the GNS Endowment Study, a specialist report which will be a treasure trove, not only to the scientific technological community, but to those seeking to move from international sources of capital allocation into New Zealand. Obviously, the jewel in the crown, which I cannot understate, is fast track. The Act has an overarching purpose, which is development, but it does have guardrails, but it will make mining an area where people will have more certainty over process and outcome. For far too long, employees have been riddled with uncertainty. Will I actually have a medium to long-term job in this enterprise if the owners, if the promoters cannot get environmental permission? We've at long last brought to heel the gatekeepers that hide behind the outdated Wildlife Act, something conceived in the 1950s, well and truly beyond its useful live-by date, and the cumbersome Conservation Act. Of course, there is more to do, and we need to ensure that our fellow New Zealanders, who are the regulators, who occupy administrative positions implementing these pieces of legislation, they do it in a way that is not offensive or inimical to our productivity. And I say to you, the executives, the managers of the firms, where you find cases that are egregious or an excessive overreach of bureaucratic authority, please alert me to them, because this undermines and threatens the narrative reflected by our Prime Minister of economic growth. In the absence of growth, we are going to lose the talent of our nation. Of course, at the centre of Fast Track is the notion of one-stop shop. It doesn't mean that approvals will be signed on the back of a cigarette pack, but it means it'll be a lot more efficient, and we will focus on the principle of managing risks in a proportionate manner, attaching conditions that are proportionate to the risk that you're managing, not fairy tales. Of course, another area that's often ignored and not spoken about is quarrying. If you want to boost the infrastructure of our nation, you need quarries. And the quarrying industry has been held captive to, it has been ransomed. That is going to change. A host of quarries are in the fast track. They will not be hobbled, they will not be blighted by reasons inversely related to the quality of the outcome that people seek. As a consequence of the projects listed in the fast track, 2,500 jobs will come available at peak production, well-paying jobs. And I don't need to tell the people of this community how valuable and how well paid those positions are. It will lead to $2.5 billion in terms of export earnings by 2033, a mere 8 years away. The Prime Minister described his vision as being about yes culture. Yes culture does require us to be willing to engage in trade-offs. If we remain static, if we remain unwilling to achieve dynamic outcomes, people will move beyond us. It's important that when we're considering conservation land, that we accept that not all conservation land is equal. Mining already happens on conservation land. Conservation land is a gradation of value and importance. Stewardship land, which is a part of conservation land, was put there during the time of the 1980s because the government of that time had nowhere else to shove it. Stewardship land is not conservation land. Stewardship land is public land which ought to be made available with certain guardrails to effect the development and the growth of our country. Look, I don't want to come and make this speech without owning up to the remarks about Freddie the Frog. They were a rhetorical device said in Parliament. They reflected the fact that gone are the days where a single skink, frog, or some other species is going to be able to be deified and turned into such an item of such importance that hundreds of jobs and the livelihood of communities will disappear. Under fast track, that's all gone. We've had far too much money pursued by such ideological foci. This particular organisation, Oceana, spends nigh on $1 million around this broad area on pest control. The work that they undertook on Archie's frog is some of the best available in New Zealand. But there is a sneer-like response when the mining companies are willing to provide money to alleviate the pressure on you and I as taxpayers, because we are not funding DOC to the level that they would like, because we do not have the surplus. So when private sector companies, such as mining companies, rock up and are willing, in a trade-off sense, to contribute towards the cost of effecting better ecological outcomes, the time is overdue. We should take up those options. Look, I said earlier in this speech, we really are now engaged in a more considered, and it will be robust, debate about mining. And on this issue, I would say to my opponents, I'm going to listen more to the blue-collar community than woke-collar sponges. Mark my words. We will have to deal with the deadweight effect of many of the regulations that successive governments have allowed to pile up year after year, whether it's on fishing, whether it's on farming, whether it's on mining, whether it's on quarrying. And it's almost that local government is powerless to do anything about it because they blame central government. Central government politicians feel marooned because the law is so complex. Through Fast Track, we have cut a path through that regulatory thicket. I think in terms of this particular strategy in relation to minerals, it's too easy for it to generate into a predictable, polarised debate. Save the lizard, hate the pollution. We cannot afford such a binary, simplistic polarisation. Look at the cost of living challenges you and I have as Kiwis. Ask yourselves why so many of your own young people are packing up and leaving to go to Australia when we are surrounded by a profound resource base. Sadly, we have not had a government for a long period of time that is willing to lead with the chin, change the law, get a megaphone, and promote the industry, both to international and domestic investors. So with the mineral strategy, there are three things underlying it. Obviously, we want it to be productive, we want it to be valued, and we want it to be resilient. In here, we reflect the fact that the Crown will uphold its obligations in treaty settlements. Secondly, we will engage with the community and ensure that the guardrails are such that regions will not be blighted by the growth of the industry. But we are not going to be guilt-tripped. We are not going to sit idly by while tiny groups believe they have an incessant power of veto to stop development in an area. This government, this minister, will never acquiesce with that outcome, irrespective if you're a Kiwi or an iwi. The delivery, obviously, of this roadmap will go beyond the next election. If you have fears that it may not live beyond the electoral cycle, then look for an electoral answer. If you want this type of certainty to boost and maintain economic productivity, economic resilience, then bring your best ideas forward at the next election. We have a critical minerals list. Folks, we have a host of rare and critical minerals that we've never focused on before. Some of them are largely, in a global sense, controlled by China, who have taken a clever and very shrewd approach as they have managed to get their hands around the supply chains of incredibly important minerals. We have some of those minerals in our country. It will take time to develop them. It will take time to open those opportunities up. But nothing will happen unless there is permission space. Nothing will happen unless there's an echo chamber of approval. And this list goes through a host of those minerals. Yes, it does have coal and gold, and so it should. If these two minerals are capable of generating wealth, as this place does here, generating jobs, at least 30% of the workforce here are my own people, the tangata whenua. We need to deal honestly with the fact this is an opportunity for substantial regional employment at a time where regions are bleeding people to Australia. It also has iron sands. Not very far from here, on Māori-owned land, is the Taharoa iron sands. They have 2 or 3 applications in the fast track. I look forward to those applications being dealt with in a manner 1,000% more professionally handled than their recent circus-like attempt to secure consents under current legislation. We have not had a comprehensive picture for a long period of time as to what is our minerals endowment. It could be because we've conceived minerals as a threat to tourism. It could be that there's been greater wealth associated with white gold, otherwise known as our farming sector. It could be that the generation of New Zealanders who felt more comfortable talking about mining have passed on. Those are belief systems that you and I cannot afford. We today, by publishing these documents, are reflecting the sheer reality. If we want to turn the fortunes of our motu, our country around, we have to seize every opportunity, as I say, within guardrails, to use nature's bounty. The operation here today, in terms of the gold mine, just think about it. Human capital, high quality skills, training people so they go home safely every day. Machinery, some of the most sophisticated machinery in New Zealand, and people capable of using that machinery because their skills have been honed not only in New Zealand, but Africa, Australia, Central Asia, and most importantly, capacity in an enterprise like this to manage every conceivable challenge. These are the types of skills our country needs up and down throughout the motu. Yes, of course, New Zealand is on a journey towards diverse types of energy, cleaner types of energy, but I am never going to sit idly back during that journey and close my eyes as unrealistic plans and unrealistic proposals are foisted upon garden variety kiwis that will drive them out of business, while someone in some distant place or some pudgy-handed banker in a mahogany-panelled office thinks they can impose these costs on you and I. That ain't happening while the matua's on his feet. The only other thing I would say, folks, is that I'm not underestimating how much of a challenge this is. It's a challenge within Māoridom. It's a challenge within the Green movement. It's a challenge within our communities. But there's a challenge bigger than every single element that I listed there. It's a challenge to boost the productivity, the financial strength, the viability of our nation, or we are going to suffer a continual downward spiral. And for those of you worried about whether or not we're going to offend trade partners, other people on the other side of the world, I would say to you that the world is no longer what it was 3, 6, 5, 7, 8 years ago. Since COVID, our circumstances economically require robust trade-off decisions. We must focus on economic growth. This sector can be a contributor. It can offer a reason as to why our families can remain in regional New Zealand, live in a high-quality form of household, and at the same time enjoy what you and I take for granted as our birthright, a place where you can work in a mine, go for a surf, and shoot a deer all in one day.